Welcome to the Funnel Reboot Podcast, brought to you by Marketing What's New. Let's get into today's show.
Hey, this is Glenn, and I am so glad you are back for another Funnel Reboot. We're going to talk about media today. First, let me remind you, I love getting recommendations on future guests, and you can let me know about those by coming on our social accounts at Funnel Reboot or calling the listener feedback line 613-703-7073. Let's get to today's show. If you want to communicate your message to others in this world, you only have 4 channels to choose from: paid, owned, shared, and earned, sometimes called peso. If we expect to get some attention through shared or earned media, we should be prepared to face resistance because we're competing with the biggest and most attention-grabbing stories out there. My guest is a former journalist who has turned his talents to serving the communication needs of other businesses. He does this through Make It Matter Media, the agency which he runs jointly with his wife, Catherine. From their base in Kingston, Ontario, they work with a diverse range of clients: small, medium businesses, not-for-profits, and even politicians. He has also been actively engaged in academia. He's worked with educational institutions like Queen's University, St. Lawrence College, Algonquin College, starting first in communications roles and progressing to become a part-time professor on the very subject. An area where Phil loves to apply his writing and podcasting skills is generating awareness for businesses in less populated regions. Ever since he teamed up with an Ottawa-based publisher in 2019, he has been the front-facing piece of several media properties focused on Eastern Ontario, which is as large as and is as sparsely populated as the state of Maine. His profiles on that area convey how these companies bet their future on the local labor force and how much is at stake for the community where the company chooses to locate itself. So if your brand or your client's brand shares any commonality, you'll agree with me that it's really tough to get media coverage for organizations like these. That's why we need to hear from our guest, because he employs the scrappy entrepreneurial tactics that you will need in order to get your message out there. Let's go talk to Phil Gaudreau. I'm really glad to welcome Phil Gaudreau. Welcome to Funnel Reboot.
Hey, thanks for having me, Glenn.
Sure thing. So today we're going to talk about how companies and organizations of all kinds can get their message out. And people are familiar, obviously, with the standard ways. There's advertising, there's putting content out organically and hoping that it's picked up by search engines. You have been fortunate in that your past has involved you with a whole other type of messaging and communications platform. Can you tell us about that?
Sure. So I've been in the kind of media sphere now for just over a decade, starting with radio, moving into internal public relations, communications, that kind of thing. And then during that time, my wife and business partner started doing some consulting more on the kind of marketing side, a little bit extra income, side hustle, whatever you want to call it. And when my most recent full-time real job ended in fall 2018, I was kind of left with a choice of, do I move? Couldn't find work locally, kind of a couple challenges there, and decided to lean into the consulting full-time. And that sort of platform for us has really grown. It's now been just over 4 years and includes everything from writing for advertorial purposes, editorial purposes, internal publications, kind of you name it there, quite a diversity of writing, media and public relations, some government relations, or what's sometimes called public affairs. So that kind of behind the scenes of helping a client that has a pressing need that can be addressed by government. And a lot of project management, as I'd call it, where that was some of the especially early work where client basically kind of needed a fractional chief marketing officer or chief communications officer. Uh, One particular client, well, they're all my favorites, but one of my favorite clients, um, uh, had kind of a logo that had started in MS Paint a couple of decades ago and didn't have a permanent website, and didn't really know how to get from A to B. So it was about guiding them through that process of, okay, let's find the right vendors, let's figure out the right quotes, let's get some stock photos for you, because hey, you can't launch a website without images, can you, Glenn?
Yep.
Yeah, and
So yeah, it's covered the gamut.
That's right. And that's my preferred type of client, really. I, have a bit of a diversity of skill sets from all these different experiences. Even working in internal communications for Ottawa's Algonquin College for a number of years, uh, there was a lot of interaction with the marketing department, for instance. And I spent a year on a change management project, and so that really diversified my skill sets. I'm definitely one of those mile wide, inch deep types on some of these things. You're not going to want me editing your Oscar worthy videos. But if you want me to kind of set the frame up and we can go get a professional videographer to fill in the blanks, happy to do that. Done that for lots of clients.
Right. And the common thread that I'm seeing is that comms element of being able to pull the information and get it out to publication. Uh, let's talk about that for a little bit. I mean, the landscape has changed dramatically, as we all know. The place that media has, compared to when, there were three networks and there were, a local daily in every town and city, as well as several terrestrial radio stations, and they really owned, the means of getting information out. We're not in that media landscape anymore.
And never will be.
Right. It's not coming back. So as that change has happened, though, there are things that those entities did that we still need. Stories still need to be written and even read off, or they need to be layered on with video or audio, as we're doing here. So we can't exactly say that they're just going and gone. They're still very much there, but the components have been kind of scattered about now. So let's maybe take some of those components. What would you say are the components of things that used to all be done by a publisher, but now they're kind of sort of done between the advertiser or marketer, maybe individuals like yourselves, and finally the publisher?
Mm-hmm. So media buying is something that comes into our wheelhouse semi-regularly. I'm sure less often than it would have, say, a decade or more ago, especially on the traditional side. And I always frame media buying to people as paying to access someone's audience. And I say, in the short term, going to give you a nice boost, and in the long term, why not build your own audience? And that's where I see one of the biggest shifts is. There's a tremendous media centralization. I'm trying to think of the word concentration, I think is the word I'm looking for here.
Yep.
And it's only getting worse, right? As we're chatting right now, Rogers is trying to buy Shaw. That's going to have significant impacts for Chorus, which Shaw is a majority shareholder of, and provides a lot of money to, which will instead go to Rogers Properties, as one example. Post Media just recently announced 11% editorial staff layoff, as another example. So those platforms, right, used to have a lot of power, used to have a lot of cachet, and they were in charge. They dictated the stories. They pursued the stories they were interested in. Sure, there were PR people like me pitching them stories and trying to shape coverage, sometimes successfully, sometimes not. A mentor of mine liked to say, and he was saying this, a decade ago, that PR people were kicking journalists' butts. And he'd say that to journalists, and they were going, "What are you talking about?" Right? And now we're seeing that today, right? Where
Right.
PR people greatly outnumber journalists. They out-earn journalists, and because of that brain drain in journalism, retirements, layoffs, you name it, the average journalist doesn't have as much life experience. They typically, I'm actually writing about this for my client newsletter this month. They have a lot of biases because they are lower income, which and biases has a negative connotation, but these just shape their coverage, right?
Right.
They're university educated. They often right, they're in a certain age demographic because a lot of them are new to the profession and they're burning out and they're going and joining PR and comms, so they don't have as much life experience. So all that to say, all those factors erode the credibility of the organization, which then erodes the cachet and the audience size. So then you get into more of a level playing field. The power of these publications has been eroded. So if you're a marketer, you're an advertiser, you're looking at these publications, all of a sudden now their credibility is for sale in the form of advertorial. So
Hmm.
you can't get into the paper by pitching the editor a worthwhile story that you hope they get right, that you hope appears in a timely fashion, which is not a guarantee in smaller communities anymore. um, then you can just buy your way in and cut them a check and say, maybe they're producing the content. Sometimes that's the case. They assign a writer, or sometimes you're submitting something that they do a kind of a once over and say, yeah, this meets our standards, or no, it doesn't. A little bit trickier to do on TV, right? TV still kind of favors the old school advertising model, or online pre-roll ads. But you're seeing, again, ratings significantly declining for their actually just a couple of days ago, the broadcast partner for the NHL in the States, or one of them, I should say, Sinclair Rally Sports, announced, I believe it was bankruptcy, or if not, significant financial distress. And you think to yourself, like, live sports, that was supposed to save TV, right? You can't
Right.
be
Right.
it.
It was the last bastion. Yes.
Yeah. And that's proving to be, hey, not necessarily the case. I know, the NHL is not America's number one sport, but Super Bowl ratings, right, are also not doing as well as they have historically. And that still has such a cultural connection, right? Of watching the Super Bowl being a thing that you do, knowing the outcome, even if you're not a football fan, watching the ads, right? They built all these, watching the halftime show, and even that's getting eroded. So anyway, I'm a little off your original topic, but coming back to it, so you could kind of bemoan the state of media in your community. Um, from a business perspective, you have to look at what are the opportunities. So the opportunities include advertorial, right? They include building your own platforms, which I've endorsed to a number of clients. So one client I work with is the Greater Kingston Chamber of Commerce, Kingston, Ontario, and they have a weekly newsletter to clients. Now, when I joined, like many other chambers, their newsletter was essentially, here are some cool reports that the Ontario Chamber of Commerce has put out, and here's our upcoming
Oh,
events. Okay,
yeah.
and
Right.
and I'm a business owner, right? And I look at that and kind of go, okay, reports are nice, kind of interesting. I
Oh,
guess they're
I could
advocating.
go get that from their website.
Yeah, events. Okay, I'm glad to know about your events. Nothing really wrong there. But what we've since done in evolving it is now there's what's coming up at City Hall this week. What's in the news that might affect you as a business owner? So a great example this week is the city of Kingston, is where I'm based, Kingston, Ontario, is looking at expanding transit to rural areas. How might that affect the ability of you to recruit workers in rural areas who could rely on that for transportation, or you even to neighboring municipalities? We're looking at the Nexus program for fast cross-border travel is being expanded. What's going on at the local airport? The federal government's announcing changes to EI, or the Bank of Canada's hiking interest rates. What do all these things kind of mean for your business? So it's really trying to get inside the head of your audience. Now, let me come back to the point on audience. So I talked about audiences for traditional media getting smaller, and people kind of look at media and go, oh, it's all shrinking. It's all bad news. It's not the case, right? It's just becoming smaller and more niche and more focused. Another client I was working with, I don't think this project will end up seeing the light of day. There was kind of some stuff that I can't really get into, but we were looking at launching a construction news site for the local construction industry. Ottawa already does this. Some other larger communities do this. And that was, again, intended to be finely tuned towards business owners, tradespeople, people who want to work in the trades,
Yep.
people who, there's an expression, allied businesses, I think, is one, or you might have another. So let's say you're a marketing company that works with construction businesses, or you're an accounting company that works with construction businesses.
Right.
Their success is your success. You need to know, and you need to be able to advise your clients and say, hey, did you see this RFP that went up? Or did you hear about this tax change? Blah, blah, blah. right? So you're never going to see that in the Ottawa Citizen, right? You're never going to see that even in the good old days, the Ottawa Citizen talking about tax changes that affect the construction industry, right? Unless it was a national scandal. So there's
Right.
actually a tremendous opportunity in these niche media. When I start my day, I read, depends on the day, about 6 different newsletters. One's on foreign affairs, one's on Parliament Hill stuff, one's on kind of an American business centric newsletter. A couple of others that are more column, op-ed, cultural issue, that kind of thing. But imagine telling somebody that 10 years ago, right? That you were going
Right.
to
So
get all
your
these
point
different.
is, what are you not reading? You're not reading a
Yeah,
local daily. You're not reading
yeah.
the major publication in your sphere.
Yeah, that's right. I do scan those things and I do pay attention to them because there is
Yep.
local relevance to my client, the Greater Kingston Chamber of Commerce, to
Sure.
other clients. But our media consumption habits are just going to change, right? It's not all of a sudden, okay, my local paper is gone, my local TV station is gone, I guess I'll just consume nothing. Well, no,
No.
there's something that's going to fill that gap. And you need to understand where that is and be there. And potentially, if it's relevant to your business, if you have the scope and scale, if you have the interest, build that platform yourself, or partner with others to build that platform.
Perfect. Some may be familiar with something that is a model. It's coined by Ginny Dietrich, and it's called the PESO model. So PESO stands for paid, earned, shared, and owned. Um, you've pretty much covered all of them, and that's great because usually shared doesn't get covered. But you were talking about it where you were saying allied parties will, put something together that scrambles up maybe two different niches, but it's because the audience is the same. Um, there's so much that you said in there. Let's maybe start with one of the things that may be a foregone conclusion to someone like you who reads so much and who has been inside of media for so long. But I'm sure there are marketers who are listening who may not have dipped their toes in this, who are wondering in this kind of niche environment, how am I supposed to reach someone not by their demo, not by what size of company they are, but by the context of the story that they're reading? Can you give us a little bit of help on where someone can feel a bit more comfortable with that? Because it's probably not something that many of them have touched on unless they've done, let's say, display advertising. So
Mhm.
what do you say to the person who looks at that and is kind of, you know, shell shocked, maybe a little bit frightened by the idea?
Hmm. That's very interesting, right? I remember a study from a few years ago. I believe it was a Dutch publication that saw what was coming in with GDPR, and they decided, you know what? Forget it. We're just going to stop all personalization cookies. We're just going to show all our ads to whoever visits the website, and they can sort it out whether they're interested or not. And their advertiser satisfaction and a lot of their statistics went up, right? This hyper personalization, it makes a lot of sense to a lot of marketers and people, and there may be applications for it. I'm not saying that there's never a reason for that, but um, I really hate when we reduce people to a series of demographic check boxes or a series of preconceived notions about who they are because of where they work and what profession they are, and go on and on, right? um, I remember I remember one particular campaign I did with a client, which was about real estate investing. And we were, going down all the Facebook checklist of they're interested in real estate, they're interested in HGTV, they're interested in blah, 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 the following shows, right? We ran the ads in Toronto, Ottawa, and Kingston. And
Okay.
it was like pulling teeth to get a lead form filled out in Kingston. Toronto and Ottawa, we did okay. There's a fun hack for any marketers who haven't worked with real estate agents before is, they'll accept a high cost to acquire if it gets them a lifelong client because they'll make their money back no problem, right?
Sure.
So something to keep in mind. But anyway, we weren't super happy with the results, even though the cost to acquire, if we got a deal out of it, we more than made our money back many times over. Just one deal, might I add. But I said, I think we can do this better. And so I shifted the format to be an event, and we broadened the targeting a little bit, and it was on Eventbrite too, so it could be discovered that way and such, and ran the campaign again. And our cost to acquire literally went down by, in Kingston, it was 1% of what it was before. And I'm not joking.
Wow.
Yeah. Now, I think there was some distrust of the lead forms. If we compared, our cost to acquire for the local in-person, this was pre-COVID event, in Kingston versus say our Toronto or Ottawa leads, it was maybe a tenth. So I think the Kingston people were just being a little stingy with with clicking or
Sure.
linking, filling out our form. It may have just been. I'll be fair. I may have messed something up in the campaign. There we go. Um, this will be one of those FUN events. FUN being the acronym.
Right.
And anyway, we ended up with I think it was about 40 registrants or so. Free event, so some no showed. We still
Sure.
had maybe close to 20 shows up, and within a week we had one deal. And again, made all our money back, and we still had a bunch of other leads to kind of cycle through. Some of them serious, some of them less serious.
So it was your second one, and I think that that's a really interesting lesson. It seemed even counterintuitive to you.
Yeah, I thought, broadening this and not going with, people who have seemingly expressive kind of interest. But I mean, Facebook can only put in, I mean, yes, there's, I was looking this up for another thing I was writing recently, 100,000 plus variables. I don't know if that's an exaggeration or not, but anyway, but they can't account for what's going on in these 6 inches between your left and right ear, right? They can only
Yes.
account for what you've put into the computer, essentially. Or maybe
Yes.
what you've said loudly in the presence of your iPhone. Um,
Yeah.
but you're looking at 2018, 29, I think it was 2019, interest rates and the money you got in the bank and the equity in your home, and you're thinking, oh, maybe this is a good time to get into the real estate market, but you haven't put anything into Google yet. You haven't really loudly said that in the presence of your smartphone. Facebook's not going to know, hey, we should suggest this event to you, right?
I mean, yeah, we can speculate all we want about what they are
Mm-hmm.
doing to algorithmically reach those people. But I think the point that I'm hearing from you, especially because it's around content, right? We are speaking about, in this case, economic indicators and how they are affecting a person. The same could be
Mm-hmm.
true in a B2B scenario. You can come up with
Mm-hmm.
ways to talk their language, walk a mile in their shoes, and get there. I think what if I were to look at the second way you did the campaign is you had just as much focus on the conversion action, the
Mm-hmm.
form, but you loosened things up on the impressions. And so you allowed things to get more widely distributed. And as you say, with what people's brains do, we are pattern recognition experts. So the targeted individuals will their eye will catch something. They will notice on a sidebar or from the next suggested story or as they swipe through their feed. There are things that will certainly come, maybe not even at a fully conscious level, that tell them they should lean into what this is about. And then, that's your chance. At that
Yeah.
moment, whatever copy you have, your header, that is going to either tell them, nope, not for me, or allow them to get to the next stage. And then you at least are on base and you may be able to, get them to home plate through converting on a form.
Yeah. And, if I can throw out two other small points on that, one being, I think the idea of a lead form, right, is very salesy, is very making a commitment, right? Whereas attending an information event, well, information, I love information. We all love information, right? Even if, even if it leads us to making worse decisions, because, that gut choice is usually the right one. Yeah, you can sell people the right people anyway, information all day long. The other piece that came to mind was The Tipping Point by Malcolm Gladwell, right? That idea that there are people who are sharers. And so if you're reaching
Yes.
investors, investor being a very, competitive kind of thing, I get the opportunity and you don't, I want to outperform you, versus a broader base where you might get somebody who will say, oh, this looks really neat. It's not for me, but I bet you so and so would love to know about this. Or, oh, somebody was just talking about this the other day, right? And so I think it's difficult to systematically target those people. But when you get a hold of some of them, and I do like to think of myself as one of those people, which is probably why I do so well at aggregating content for newsletters and
Right.
such. Yeah, you've got a gold mine on your hands as long as they know the right people.
That's right. Those sharers or mavens, they consume a lot of information and get it to where it needs to go. And I agree with you. There's no possible way of trying to set up a media buy or even a clever social distribution scheme that can account for those. They're going to just happen. So I guess the point is to allow your content to be widely available enough that it does happen, right? So that kind of catches on. That uh, some people claim, oh, they want something to go viral. No, that's you can't catch lightning in a bottle like that. So don't try. Instead, just look for those highly probable ways that people will share what you have, right?
Hmm. Hmm. One of
Um,
my
Go
go
ahead.
ahead. All right. One of my favorite campaigns from the last few years that really, did exactly what you're saying. I think they gave themselves all the right conditions to go viral, and got a lucky break when they did. And let me know if you've seen this one. It was Aero Mexico, and they had seen some studies that basically suggested that Mexicans loved going to the U.S. for vacations, but that Americans didn't want to do that. Safety, other reasons that
Sure.
were wrapped into that. And so what they did was they offered people a DNA test and gave them a discount based on their percentage of Mexican heritage. And there were some people who were just, kind of think of the TV show Roots or Discovering Your
Yep.
Roots on PBS, right?
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
Same kind of idea where they were just floored to find out they had all this Mexican heritage, and some of them didn't react super well to it. And then they were told they're getting a discount to go fly there, and they're like, "Oh, well, I suddenly have a different opinion on this."
Yeah.
Right, but it immediately
Yeah.
provokes kind of controversy and interest and questions. But again, you can't predict who's going to have Mexican heritage. You can certainly
Right.
go and follow up with those people that have strong opinions about visiting Mexico, or you can go cruise around the state of New Mexico or Nevada or wherever the case may be, hoping to find these people and that they're willing to participate in your kooky marketing campaign. But they really caught lightning in a bottle there, and kudos to them on a great concept, well executed. So if you haven't seen that one, there's a hilarious video. Go watch it.
Sweet. That's a really good way of certainly throwing out in the air. Um, I want us to. We're going to shift over to talking instead about a little bit more of how we reach that audience and about these publishers who, while they may not be as big as they once were, they still are an excellent way to reach an audience in either consumer or B2B kind of marketing. And we're going to hop on that as soon as we have this quick break. I'm taking a moment talking about how you're managing in the world of GA4. To me, the new Google Analytics is more than just an interface. Its capabilities open up our entire funnel for analytical insights and for activating our marketing data. Now, most of you have installed GA4. That's great. To do this takes a bit more effort than that because you must configure GA4 with Google Cloud components, takes BigQuery, Looker Studio, services that API data back and forth, etc. And that's why I'm holding GA Fast Forward in-person events to do this over 2 days with people. A group of us work together to implement this new stack using our own company's marketing data. We come away with ready-made dashboards and AI-built audiences that we can leverage in our Google Ads. These workshops are running in Eastern Canada and across New York State, and soon in Pennsylvania and Massachusetts too. You can go now and see all the details by going to gafastforward.com, either with the number 4 in fast forward or all spelled out. Let's get back to the show. We're going to hit this head on. There's a very simple way, I would imagine, or one word that we could possibly use to answer how it is that an audience is reached via a publisher. If I had to pick one word, it would be content. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. And, reach is sometimes such a funny word, right? And that we always think of it as I'm going to pay and my ad's going to go in front of people and then that's going to be kind of the end of it. But, the last point we were talking about just before the break was that idea of going viral, which you can't really control. But what you can do is make interesting, entertaining content that people remember, that people want to share. I actually wrote about this in my client newsletter recently about um, an expression I heard about 10 years ago, which was we hate advertising, but we love advertising in particular. Right. And so we can all name our favorite ads. We can all name the ones that get stuck in our
Right,
heads that we enjoy.
right,
Right. And so I used examples like the Meow Mix, the classic Meow Mix jingle.
right.
I used the Radio Shack, RIP, Super Bowl ad from a few years ago, the 80s called They Want Their Store Back. Right. Immediately visually comes to mind for me, probably does for you as
Sure.
well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. There's a great one from a company, EDS, and I think they were later bought by Hewlett Packard, if I'm not mistaken. But anyway, it was they described themselves as herding cats. They were a technology consulting
I
company,
remember
and so
that.
they had cowboys literally out there herding cats, right? The Apple 1984 ad, right? Probably one of the more famous
Sure.
sort of examples. So you create a great ad, a memorable ad with an interesting concept. Um, those are very much, I'd say, more in the awareness kind of space versus the buy, 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 buy type of ads. But
Sure.
but I think it's all the same in that if it's not memorable, if it's not interesting, if you don't want to show it to anybody or share it to anybody, it's going to get forgotten.
No doubt. And that HP one is great because there are many times where, on the face of it, if you're looking at, let's say, let's pick someone in, the Northeast US or maybe a rural part of a province like Ontario, they're a mid-sized light manufacturer. And they may be saying to themselves, we have machinery and raw supplies and we send product out the other door. How can that possibly be an interesting story? Well, you've just highlighted several where they did that, and it's a matter of kind of looking deeply into what exactly a value proposition is, how the audience might be captivated by that. And I know that there are people who do this really well. I count you among them. Can you maybe tease out what you would say to those naysayers who still think that they don't have anything that could possibly be turned into a story?
Yeah. I think if you look at TikTok or Instagram today, right, and the number of niche, successful channels, and sometimes people making income or supporting their businesses through those, and their product offering or their subject material is extremely otherwise uninteresting. Um, my wife has stumbled across a few TikTok channels that focus on like the cremation and funeral industry, and
Wow.
we don't, or at least didn't, have any clients in that space when she started looking at those. But she found it really interesting and started kind of going down that rabbit hole. There's a museum, I believe it's in the States. I know I've seen them on my channels a few times, even though I don't follow them because their stuff has just gone huge. And I'm gonna say it's either a printing press museum or it's related to news history or something. And so what they'll do is they'll use the old school printing press materials and they'll print a headline of some kind of, oh, we reached 200,000 followers, or
Ah,
different sort of, right, producing a newspaper the old school kind of way. And they get there's just tremendous view counts off of some of those. Does it lead to more people visiting the museum? Maybe not, right? I haven't visited the museum. I can't even remember exactly where it is in the States. I just remember that it is American. But does that need to be the goal, right? If it's getting people to their site, perhaps, or if it's participating in some kind of virtual or online event, or uh, you name it, right? Did they take all those views, as you'll see sometimes when somebody has a viral tweet or something, and say, well, I don't really have a side hustle, but if you want to support this charity or whatever the case may be, go over here. So I think it's thinking through not only what the content is, how you're going to share it, how it's going to spread, how you're going to get that reach, whether paid, organic, a mix thereof. But what are you going to do when you actually have it?
Right, right. Let's see what order we need to tackle that in, though, because
Mm-hmm.
if at some point it's going to be carried by a publisher, and I, as the company who's doing it, am not sure yet whether or not this looks to them like a story they would do at no charge and I could just earn my way in, or whether or not this is something that I would need to pay for, but maybe they could help me with. Help me through, what might have that ball fall on either side of the fence.
Sure. So there was one client, a previous client I was working with, and they were really trying to highlight their Yeti line, for instance, right? They had a number of Yeti mugs and drinks and all that kind of stuff. And a lot of their videos basically boil down to your traditional style advertising. Look at the store. Look at the store. Look at the product. Look at the product. And what I said is, let's look at some more, news you can use, is the expression we like to use in journalism. How about a video on how to clean your Yeti? And it turns out it was their most successful, video they had produced to date, and it only took a couple of minutes to do, right? And I said, all right, how about cooking with your Yeti, right? You fill it with boiled water and you cook some ramen or something like that, because you can't do that, right? I just went and kind of Googled. I took 10 minutes. I'm like, all right, what are some hacks you can do with your Yeti, right? Because people love that kind of content they could, in theory, use, even if the actual number of people who then go on to use it questionable, right? And then it was funny. We were doing a holiday campaign around engraving Yetis, and they didn't do a video on that. And then a local competitor did, and they did a great job with it, right? It was very much in the here it is, and here's the design, and just the very quick kind of scenes, and here's us cleaning it, and ta-da, it's done. Tremendously effective, right? Very, very interesting. Very much gets the imagination going of, ooh, I could do that. Oh, so I think it's
For
just
sure.
it's you may not think your story is interesting, but people who haven't worked in your industry, people who don't spend all day on your shop floor, people who don't aren't familiar with your industry, whatever the case may be, they might be. You never know. They
Right,
might.
right. That little how it works segment. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It
Um,
used to be a whole TV show. 30 minutes
exactly.
an episode, right? Based on
Right.
exactly that.
So you've highlighted yet another way that people in your sector look at this that, people like me don't, which is it long or short form content? Like I can tell you were just now doing that. So I'll lob you a
Mm-hmm.
long content idea. And I believe it
Yeah.
was done by a past or present entity you work with, the Ottawa Business Journal, which, does
Yes.
stories across at least Eastern Ontario. So I remember recently that they ran a story, and it's on a very well-known company. They're called Ross Video, and Ross Video, while it has, now thousands of employees, its beginnings were not in a major city, but in a very small town. This is a town that was settled back in the early 1800s even, and there was a house on a kind of a farm property that had fallen into disrepair, and it was literally next door to where Ross Video had its roots. The town was about to demolish it. There was a small part of a conservation society in the town that wanted to save it, and the owners of Ross Video looked at that and said, well, how much do you need to actually save this house? Turned out it wasn't a lot, and they divulged the numbers in the story. And now it is a place that is being used by the community. There are little local tours, and I think it also is being used as a corporate retreat. So it has a lot of elements to it. It was pretty simple thing that companies of a mid-size or greater would probably do, and not even think of contacting anybody in media. They would just do it. Maybe they would mention it in their internal newsletter. Yet this one got I would say, at least a double-page spread in a magazine, and I saw several long pieces on it on the web. this worked out, I think, rather well for them. Tell me,
Mhm.
how does that look to you as far as a story that comes out and eventually does some goodwill fostering for the employer and for the company?
Mhm. Hmm. That's interesting. I haven't seen that particular story, but it does sound interesting, right? And I think that's um, in a news writing kind of setting, or even in a content creation kind of setting. We talk about news values. We talk about does it contain famous people or people of kind of note? Certainly, Ross Video to the Ottawa Business Journal audience, they're in there pretty regularly. Um, is there a timeliness to the story? Is there a now to it, or something that has changed? Let me think now. Controversy is a good one, and so I could see a bit of mild controversy there with what's going to happen, what's going to be the outcome for this property, who's going to save it, right? We do unfortunately really like bad news, and particularly that internal kind of conflict. So in looking at a story, I kind of you'll go down this checklist of uh, do we think it has the ingredients to make it interesting? And I think what YouTube has particularly shown us in the last couple of years is how do you invert the formula a little bit, or how do you tweak the story? Even podcasts, I would say, do this as well, to put the interesting details up first to get that kind of clickbaity sort of title that gets people in and gets them started. One of my favorite YouTube channels is Half as Interesting. And they take the most boring, obscure, strange, and they make it really interesting. And they do that a few different ways, right? They do it with how they structure the cascade of information. They do that with very clever titles and fairly eye catching thumbnails. They haven't mastered YouTube face yet, but that's because they turn not trying to be as people focused as say Mr. Beast as an example. They do it with clever writing. Right, clever writing, I think, is can make a very boring topic very interesting. They insert a lot of jokes and kind of oddball humor that I really appreciate. The visual editing is very important as well. And I talked to a few clients who've been kind of looking at, do we do audio, podcast, or visual? And I say, well, is the visual going to really enhance and buff up and push the thing over the top? Another of my favorite channels is Mr. Sunday Movies, and I'm not a big movie buff, but the co-hosts are just so entertaining, and the video is so well edited that you just find yourself drawn in, right? And it keeps you coming back because you're like, oh, what silly gag is going to come up next that I'm going to miss if I'm not watching the video component? Um, so on a story like that, right? Again, I'll have to read it. I'm very curious, but local history, local people, kind of a controversy, something on the brink had to be saved, right? There's a lot of ways you can turn that into a very interesting story, or it could be a very dry. Ross Video has contributed to a campaign to save whatever farm property next door. The
Right,
property,
right.
which is this many square feet, will be used for terms of the deal were not disclosed. I've read enough of those
Yeah,
press releases, and I've written a few of them because it has had to happen sometimes where you need to announce something and you actually don't want coverage on it. But
right,
anyway,
right. And you put it out on a Friday afternoon. There's
well, no,
there
no, no,
there
no. A Thursday afternoon. The Friday is a holiday.
Gotcha. Even better. It's long dead by Monday. Um, you've highlighted another way that it's helped. You point to YouTube of all places, and it's really interesting that you say that because when we think of publications, a lot of them, including OBJ and the Eastern Ontario Business Journal, they had been print, but now they are more than that. And so, let's talk for a moment about how audio as well as video is being embraced by these publishers and how that is even providing a facility for marketers who want their brands to be talked about, but who don't know whether or not they could be on camera to do it. How are publications getting creative with co-creating this
Mhm.
type of advertorial content?
I'm not usually one to praise the higher education sector for its comms and marketing efforts, but I do want to actually turn to them for a moment because, and I do think Great River Media with the Ottawa Business Journal platforms does this well. The resourcing sometimes with higher education marketing teams, especially on the research side, is just really allows for some creative possibilities. And so I've done some work with Queen's University, and they drew some inspiration, I think, from some American business schools in particular. So when they're promoting, say, a new bit of research from a professor, right, that can be really dry on occasion. Business is maybe less dry than some areas, but it can be. And so what they'll often do is have either an internal or external freelance writer write up, say 800 word or, whatever the appropriate length is type of article. And what you'll see when you go to read that is, would you like to attend, this event that's going to dive further into the research, and the author of the study is going to be presenting. And of course, they're going to capture your email and get you on their newsletter list so they can tell you about more of their research. And what you'll sometimes also see is a little podcast at the top. So it's like, you don't want to read 800 words, or maybe you want to go deeper than 800 words. Here's this podcast, right? Sometimes video, but usually just audio. And then you get into, because universities, not always, some of them have publishing arms, or at least they work with them. Then you'll see that research come around in the form of a book. And so it's just, they think about all the different kind of channels that their audience, who is the audience for this academic research, they'll produce some that are kind of more, I don't want to say lowbrow, but they're more accessible. They're more mainstream. Not everybody's going to sit through an academic lecture. Not everybody's going to read a book. So we've got this short article version, which allows us to mobilize the research. If you've ever heard of a platform called The Conversation as well, that's originally an Australian publication. It's spread around the world. And their whole model is they share op-eds and columns and articles from faculty at university partners usually on either issues relating to the research or issues that are in the milieu. And they will then take those articles, if they're on the Conversations website, sometimes they'll appear in your major newspapers and dailies and whatever the case may be. But so they'll say, okay, great, we've got this article, great. Could it go over to The Conversation and over to traditional media? We've got the podcast, we've got the video. So now we have this kind of complete content package. If you really want to consume this information, we've tailored it to you. We've got ways of capturing your email, so we can either hit you up later for donations or to attend more events or whatever the case may be. And then we can go back to our funders, because that's really their goal with all of this, is to be able to say, National Sciences Engineering Research Council of Canada, or whatever research body that gave us the money, Social Sciences Humanities Research Council, we reached this many people, we produced this content, blah, blah, blah. So they don't have the same commercial imperatives and pressures, right, that a Ottawa Business Journal would have. But it's, when you think of it in that way of, okay, we've got this news story, and we've got the talking heads discussing the news story on our podcast. And at our next upcoming event, we're going to be talking about this particular topic, our fastest growing companies, or inflation and what businesses can do about it, or blah, blah, blah. And I think a lot of that has, coming back to a point I made earlier, more of that enduring sort of value. You got to cover some of the day-to-day what goings on. But what I was in an airport lounge recently. They had CTV on, and it was later in the day, so it wasn't maybe, prime news hour. Maybe it wasn't a busy day, but they were talking about a house fire in Kitchener. Sad story. I feel for the people who owned that house, and hopefully they all got out okay and not too many of their possessions were damaged. But I'm like, what do I do? This is
the national network. Yeah.
What do I do with this? Right? Like, there are so many pressing national kind of conversations, serious conversations to be had about policy and goings on in the world. There might just be a war going on, possibly. I realize you can't focus in on one story constantly. You got an hour of content to fill. Comes back to that Ron Burgundy quote about why can't we just tell them what we want them to hear, or what is it? Sorry, my brain's a little scrambled. But why can't we just tell them what they want to hear? It was the practical upshot of the quote, and that was lampooning the rise of the 24-hour news network. And so what we're now,
that's it.
I think part of it is we're seeing that backlash of they can't pay or don't want to pay to actually fill that with meaningful kind of content. People don't want it delivered in that paternalistic kind of pace in a TV network. I don't want to wait an hour. I'm just going to go on Twitter. I'm going to go check it out on YouTube, whatever.
Right.
And
yeah, it sounds inherently conflicted, and I'll play devil's advocate here for a second, because you've got the publisher with their imperative to publish. You've got the marketer or brand who wants their message out. I get what you're saying about how when they can align on a macro kind of issue, something of importance, then yes, it is going to be something that is turned into a story. But coming back to what you were saying about the formats, the it sounded like you were saying the person who has the content, says, should this be a short text, long text, audio, or video, and that the publisher on the other side says yes. Well, isn't that
Not
like,
always realistic, but
well, it sounds to me like 3 or 4 times the amount of work. So either you know
Mhm.
something I don't know about how we can hack this and make it less work, or we have to have some kind of filtering method for us to say, well, this is best done in this format. And we actually even have this, well greased skid that, you can just travel down to take it into that format.
yeah, yeah, and I think part of the feedback you get from your audience dictates whether we continue on down this path of, oh, hey, this article and this event was really well attended. Maybe there is space for a book here. I don't think they do that with every research paper that comes across their desk, right? Um,
Right.
there's got to be other imperatives. Either it's appeasing funders or chasing donors or whatever the case may be, advancing some kind of institutional interest. So yeah, no, I don't think to go back to my house fire example. I don't think if the local paper was covering it down, there we go, and we need a podcast on the house fire, and we need a video on this, right?
No,
And
but
we need a book on it.
I love your
The
point about
story has
seeing
to fit.
what's sure, but you could also look at the data coming back, thankfully with digital, everything has metrics. You can see what sticks and you
Hmm.
can start to notice patterns and say, well, podcasts do seem to be a very good way for dealing with this kind of member of our audience, and so this is something that marketers do understand rather well, where they're trying to put themselves into the shoes of their ideal client, and they're trying to picture, okay, is this person going to be listening to me in a lean back frame, like I want to be in video on their iPad, or is this a, sitting up and, as you said, maybe a hard copy report or long form of content that they're, sitting at a desk looking or experiencing in an event at a, from someone speaking on a stage. So marketers are pretty good at kind of grasping that. Do you think that publishers today have more of that like triple threat where they can work with an advertiser or a marketer and give them those different formats and do them all rather well?
Depends on the partner, definitely, but we kind of pride ourselves on writing. That's our internal expertise, I guess we'll say. So we do have a lot of clients coming to us for that and saying, look, we have the stories. We need to chase the experts. Sometimes that external perspective helps as well, right? Is the story any good? We really have no idea. Go chase it down for us and let us know. Um, video, yeah, video seems to be a very popular one to outsource, and it can be costly, but uh, unless you're really producing, high quality video on a very regular basis, or you can train somebody to do, I've heard some opinions. I kind of waffle on this a little bit that it's basically if it's not up here, then the rest of it's kind of interchangeable, right? And I don't mean that in terms of, I mean that mostly in terms of the technical presentation. And I would say audio is one area where you can really get that wrong, where there is definitely degrees of quality. But the point was really that if it's not Oscar worthy, then don't spend extra if it's not going to really move you from here to here.
Yes.
Anyway,
Yes, I follow what
um,
you're saying. Maybe a luxury brand cannot get away with a shaky phone-based video. There might be other cases where if I'm doing a walkthrough of a machinery floor, where a phone-based video is entirely fine.
Yeah, and to be fair, there's an authenticity as well, right? There's a butcher shop around the corner for me that I love using as a kind of a counterpoint on a lot of the marketing stuff when I was lecturing last year for St. Lawrence College. Very rough around the edges. The grammar and spelling isn't always quite there. Very conversational kind of style. Honestly, reminds me of like having a conversation with my father, who was a chef, as one of his first careers. Would be in his 50s, picture mid 50s, early 60s, white guy, boomer, with a bit of blue collar around him. that's exactly what they sound like. And I'm like, well, that's a butcher shop, right? If it was somebody with giant lip filler going, and doing all the TikTok dances around, I'd be like, well, this is totally inauthentic, and they're spending a ton of money to do this, and why, So it's got to make sense for your brand, to a point you make.
I love that. Yeah, so true. So with publication partners in the mix, um, to kind of bring us all the way back to what you were saying at the beginning with the this interesting um, swirling of forces together where it sounds like their dominance has been eroding. Now, that's actually caused some of them to concentrate their ownership, but that's still they're not on as shaky or as firm a economic footing as they used to be. So if we come back to what we are just talking about with approaching them as a partner, seeing if we can do long or short content, audio or video with them. I'm hearing from you that we should initiate those discussions because they're, let's say, if we found them to be prickly in the past, maybe they're now more flexible, they're more motivated, they're more creative in the ideas that they will bring about. Am I
Mhm.
hearing right that we can kind of go with our ideas? Some of them may be with completed finished product, some of them may only be at the idea stage, and that we will probably get farther than we had in the past when we talk to a publisher.
Yeah, I'll use an example of a client last year that had historically done a traditional media buy, and it's a small community, and they wanted to kind of keep those relationships going. So we decreased the size, and we still did it, and we said, how are we going to kind of make the most of this? And so we kind of took it from more of an RFP process, and approached the three major media clusters and said, here's what we're trying to achieve, what can you do? And we got one response that was basically like, yeah, here's our rate card, please let us know what you'd like. One response that was a little bit better, and actually had, it's one of the major national media brands, and they actually had a fairly compelling digital product, which we didn't end up executing on, but I'd love to give a spin sometime, because I'm curious how the results would be. And then the third one was very much interested in partnering with us, in kind of understanding we had these distinct mini campaigns that we were running. Wanted to potentially sponsor some of the events we were running, because I think if you're a local brand and embedded in a community, events are a very much underutilized marketing tactic sometimes, especially if you can create those kind of, if you have a very community friendly kind of brand. We wanted to create those kind of community institutions. Not Winterlude's a bad example because it's too big and it's government owned, but like that annual kind of thing that people mark on their calendar and go, I got to be there, I got to attend that. That's an important thing for our community. Um, and I think we've got a eroding social cohesion problem. We've got fewer things in common than we used to, and we keep
Yeah.
approaching relationships as consumers. How do I get the most out of this? So I think that actually presents a very interesting opportunity for brands. And it sounds a bit maybe what do they call it, late capitalist to even say that, but there is an opportunity, I think, for brands to actually step into that void and say, we actually want to create opportunities for our community to connect and get to know each other and thrive, because we see that as important to the health of our business and our continuation as a going concern. um, Park that for another day. um,
Well, no, there are think tanks out there that make no bones about the fact that local media or regional media can sometimes be used as a bellwether for how well a community is doing and how um, different um, ideologies can take root or that
mhm,
people can
mhm.
become disenfranchised, that, having access to information by people who live around where they do, that it has something to do with it. And I can't think of a brand that wouldn't want to um, help with that. Maybe it's a bit self-serving, and in the long run, of course, it's going to do them some good. But I can't see why they wouldn't want to help it in the short run either.
Mhm, mhm. And there's so the context of the conversation with the media cluster was about sponsoring some of these events, or title sponsorship or
Right.
partnership, whatever, which is great. And I think too many brands think to themselves, I'll just sponsor this walk or this event and my name will be on there. And so therefore, right. And it's like, well, yeah, those events do need sponsorship and they do need community support. Are you sure you want to give up that much, brand equity when you could just take that same amount of money and do something yourself, potentially, something original, something unique, something that's an outreach to a particular maybe community that's underserved, or I'd say think that carefully. I do. Maybe this is kind of unrelated to all the other work I do, but I talk to my clients to think carefully about their charitable and community contributions, and how do they ensure kind of a relevance to their business work and their values and the kind of the legacy they want to leave. And it doesn't always have to be self-serving. It doesn't always have to be, well, we're a sports organization, so we're going to donate to a sports charity, or we're an education organization, so we're going to donate to an education charity, because that totally serves our interests. But let's be strategic about it. Let's be deliberate about it and thoughtful, and wrap that into the story that you want to tell.
And that if you're upfront about those values, you may find a media company who is also aligned to that and who is interested in working with you to make sure that that story gets spread far and wide.
Absolutely. That's our topic of today. Hey, we've come full circle.
We certainly have. And Phil, you have demonstrated that you know this area inside and out, and I appreciate how you're able to approach it from so many different angles. There are more angles that we didn't even get to today, and if people want to cover those with you individually, how would they go about that?
Sure. You can visit our website, makeitmatter.media, where you can look at my contact info. I'm pretty easily findable on LinkedIn.
Phil, thanks again for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Know that our listeners will be, and I bet that there are ways to get new ideas on how to make their funnel even better.
Thanks for listening. Follow the show on Twitter @Funnel Reboot. If you like what you have heard today, please consider leaving a review wherever you get your podcasts.